A game of chess is divided in three parts: opening, middle game, and endgame. Endgames are mysterious as well as they are theoretical. It is sometimes boring to learn the endgames, but you absolutely should. Why you should learn the endgame? Because if you know the theory and the position is winning, then it is easy for you to win the game. If the game is tricky, the position is tricky, or towards draw, you know the theory, then it will help you to get a draw. It is always better to get a draw than to lose the game. In this video, we are going to have a look at various pawn endgames, the basic principles of the endgame like opposition, outflanking, shouldering, the rule of square as well. So stay tuned till the end. This is the most common position. This is the most common end game. The position is little hypothetical. You might not get the exact same position in your game, but if you know the rule, you know the principle, then it will be easy for you to convert any position into a win. Now, the first rule says that your pawn should never be in front of the king. You should always have king in front of the pawn if you want to make it a queen, right? Now, why is that? Because king will guide your pawn to and will make the way for your pawn to go and promote. If the pawn is in front of the king, then king won't be able to help it. If you go ahead of the if the pawn goes ahead of the king, then you might end up losing or getting a draw, right? Don't want to do that. So one thing you have to make sure that your king should be ahead of the pawn always. Now you look at this position, this is called as opposition. When the two kings are standing in front of each other, we call it as an opposition. Like here, this is an opposition. It is very important that if you have a pawn, then you should be the one who should be giving him the opposition. For example, over here, it is black to play. White has just played his king from f2 to e3. Now it is black to play. If black goes to the d5 square, then we do the outflanking. Now we go with our king one step ahead, going to the f4 square, taking control of these three squares so he cannot come. Now, whenever your opponent kings sees your pawn, then you are going to give him an opposition. You will be playing your king to e4. He goes to the side, you outflank him. Now here, if he comes on the e5 d5 square, then you can now push your pawn. The pawn should never be side by side or in front of the king, but it can always be behind the king. Now he can give a check, and the king will have to go back. Now you can also give him an opposition by king to f6. He cannot go to d5 square because of your pawn is protecting it. And same way you can continue it till the end. Here, if he's not coming to d5 square, let's say he's going back, seeing your pawn, looking at your pawn, going to the e7 square, then is the right time that you give him an opposition. You play your king to e5. He goes to the side and you outflank him. He comes up. Now you can start pushing the pawn. He cannot come to d5. He has to go back. You start pushing your pawn. If he sees your pawn, comes on the e8 square, then you give him an opposition. He makes a way, and now this is a cakewalk for your pawn to go. Doesn't matter king, it the pawn will be supported by the king. You can just make out of it. Okay. Now looking at the same position, let's have a look. What if it is white to play in this position? If it is white to play in this position, then the game is draw because you are not having the opposition. Your opponent has given you an opposition. Let's say he has just moved his king, and now you need to move away your king somewhere. What you have to do here is black. Let me just flip the board for you. Now, as black, what you'll do is you will just follow your opponent. Just look at his face. He goes to either side of the board. Let's say he go to f3 or d3. You are just going to have a look at it. Now, if he pushes his pawn up, pawn in front of the king, never going to make a queen. You go in front of the pawn only. He goes back. Now, this is something that you have to remember. Don't fall for the trap. You should not be going to the side because then he comes up with an opposition. But instead, what you can do is you just have a look at the pawn. You look and you play king e6. Now, when he comes on the f4 square, boom, you go for the opposition. Just give him a punch on his face. And that's the opposition. If he pushes his pawn, you see the pawn, you go in front of the pawn. He has to go back, repeat it. Now, here, one thing you have to remember. If he tries to trick you, now you cannot see him. This is not an opposition, right? If you play your king to f7, then he is going to come with his king to f5, and that can be a problem for you. So what you have to do instead is just go up You go with the king to e6. You can also go with the king to e8. The time he gives you comes one square away from your king to give you an opposition. That is the time you're going to give him an opposition, and then that will be a draw. Okay, so let's just have a look at this. We'll play it till the end. He comes here, you give an opposition, he pushes it, you go here. Whatever he does, it is going to be a winning position for you. Now he has to stay connected to the pawn because the pawn is under attack by the black king. If he gives the support, then the king cannot go to here, and not to this side also. It's a stalemate and a draw. This is all true when the pawn is from g file to b file. It is not true for the corner pawns. If you have the corner pawns, if you have the rook pawn, then you cannot make it a queen. Whatever position it is, it will be a draw. For example, let's have a look at this and we'll flip the board for the white side. That is why, because you don't have an extra file. You cannot outflank him. Here, whatever you do, let's say you just give an opposition, he goes to the side. What are you going to do? You cannot outflank him. There's no file in front of A. So you cannot go there. You'll have to come to this side to make a way for your pawn. And now he can just start looking at your pawn. Wherever you go, he will just keep his king in the corner and it's a draw. You have to stay protected to the pawn. He cannot go anywhere. If there would have been any file, let's say in front of A, then the king would have got a space to go on that square. But since there's nothing, it is a draw. The only thing that you have to remember in the rook's pawn, if you are having a king and not a pawn, then you have to stay in the corner. That's it. Okay, now let's have a look at some more advanced position. Let's have a look where you can outflank him. You don't have just one pawn, but instead you have two pawns over here. What can we do? Now you have to understand that's one thing, that you have to outflank him. How can you do that? You want to capture both of these pawns, taking the advantage that your king is closer to get his pawn. Right now, the king cannot enter from the h file because you are taking control of those squares. As white here, you don't play your king to e3. Don't go from the normal way because then he can come and try to give you an opposition. But instead, you go with the king to d3. Now, when he comes with his king to e6, then you don't go for d4. Because if you play your king to d4, he's going to play king d6 and then you will have to make a way for his king to come in, right? He will outflank you. But instead, you do one waiting move. You take one tempo. You play your king to c4. Now, if he goes to the side, let's say he goes to f6, then it is easy peasy for you. You can just go king d4 and then you'll be way too closer to his pawn. You'll outflank his king and you'll capture both the pawns. But if he comes to the d6 square, then you remember, if you want to promote your pawn to a queen, you need to give him an opposition. You play your king to d4. Now, where can the king go? If the king goes to e6 square, then you can just enter his camp from c5. He cannot go anywhere on the fifth rank. So you'll have to go here and you just go closer to his king. That's it. Closer to his pawn. He cannot save both the pawns. He is going to lose it and two of your pawns are going to get a queen. Now you'll have a question. Pawn cannot be ahead of the king, right? That was the rule. But here there are two pawns. You don't need to worry about it. The pawn protects each other. Two of the pawns are definitely going to make a queen and you will win the game 100% sure. So this was about the outflanking. Now I want to explain you one very interesting concept. It is called as the rule of square or the square. You can also call it as the biggie square. Now what exactly it is? So see, here the pawns are away from the king, right? The pawn is away from the king. What you can do is you need to remember one thing. If your pawn has to go here and you don't have a support of any of your piece, then count the squares. There are 4 squares that this pawn needs to promote, right? Count 4 squares to this side as well. Or you can just draw one diagonal and make a big square out of it. When you make this square, now see, if the opponent's king is inside this big square, then you cannot promote your pawn to a queen. That means he'll capture you. But right now, the king is out of this biggie square, right? And it is white to play. So then what you can do is just promote your pawn to a5. Right, if the king tries to come closer, he'll always be one move short. You'll be one ahead of him and you'll simply get a queen. Winning a game with the queen is just so easy, right? Okay, but let us have a look at the same position. What if in this position it is black to play? Now this is the biggie square, right? This is the rule of square. We don't want the opponent's king in this square. If the opponent's king is here, then he can stop your promotion. Here it is black to play and he just enters the square. So whenever you'll try to promote, he is inside that biggie square, right? So he will be in time to stop your promotion. Look at this. Promote a pawn to will be a draw. So you have to make sure that the king always stays out of the biggie square. Only then you can. This rules or these theories are important in time pressure. Under time pressure, you just calculate that this is the big square, and the king is out of it. His pieces cannot come and give you an attack. So you just start promoting. You can blitz out the move, and you win the game. This was all about the outflanking, the rule of square, opposition. There are more such principles in the pawn endgame that we will be looking in our next videos. So stay tuned for more such amazing endgame rules. Hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share with your chess friends. I'll see you again in the next